Welcome to Forthright. I'm Sulani Madsen, bringing you a podcast with last week's column on a statewide issue that should concern every Washingtonian who believes gerrymandering by political parties is wrong. We, the voters, put a bipartisan redistricting commission in place to reduce the power and influence of political parties on the boundaries of voting districts for legislature, for Congress, even for county and city. But then, one party decided that they knew better than the voters. Herewith is the column first published March 21st, 2024 in the Spokesman Review, headlined, Trust Erodes One Case at a Time. In a Democrat-controlled state, when a federal judge appointed by a Democrat president makes a decision on redistricting that affects no incumbent Democrats and multiple Republicans, voters may reasonably be skeptical of the impartiality of the results. New legislative maps were drawn after the 2020 census. Democrats had insisted the Yakima Valley needed a majority-minority district where Hispanic voters made up over 50% of the population, and the Bipartisan Redistricting Commission delivered one. It was approved by the state Supreme Court and adopted by the democratically controlled legislature, all as required by state law. But it wasn't Hispanic enough to suit at least one voter. Palmer v. Hobbs was brought in January 2022 by the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund, a well-funded Los Angeles-based nonprofit. Influence Watch describes the group as a, quote, left-wing litigation and advocacy group with a number of MALDEF alumni taking senior roles or being nominated to high-level positions in Democratic administrations at the federal, state, and local levels, end quote. Ironically for the plaintiffs, in the first election held under the new map, Senator Sen Torres, Republican of Pasco, defeated Democrat Lindsey Kiesling with 67.68% of the vote in November 2022 in the majority-minority 15th Legislative District. And now, as a result of the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund lawsuit, the first Latina senator elected from Eastern Washington is being forced out of her district because the judge accepted as fact an assertion that Hispanic voters prefer Democrats, in spite of her landslide election. Imagine the front page uproar from Hobbs and Ferguson if this was a right-wing advocacy group forcing out a Democrat. In the case of Palmer v. Hobbs, it was political from the beginning. When Secretary of State Steve Hobbs, also a Democrat, was sued over the results of Washington's Bipartisan Redistricting Commission, voters could reasonably expect Hobbs to put up a fight. Instead, Attorney General Bob Ferguson filed a notice that Defendant Hobbs takes no position. Setting up the court to make a political decision erodes confidence in the judiciary. The intervener defendants added to the case while Hobbs sat on the sidelines include Mayor Jose Trevino of Granger, Ismael G. Campos of Kennewick, and Representative Alex Ibarra, Republican of Quincy. According to Ferguson's official website, the role of the Attorney General is to provide legal representation to the state of Washington, its agencies, and state officials acting in their official capacities. The Attorney General's office confirmed by email that includes the Redistricting Commission. In his opinion on the Palmer v. Hobbs case issued August 10th, Judge Robert S. Lasnik relied on expert testimony comparing the, quote, 2022 legislative priorities of Washington's Latino Civic Alliance to the voting records of the legislators from the Yakima Valley region, end quote, and concluding the incumbent legislators in 3 districts were insufficiently supportive of the political agenda of the LCA. It sure looks and smells political. We need a judiciary committed to staying out of politics, but the blame doesn't entirely fall on the judges. Both political parties eagerly run to court when the political process doesn't go their way. Federal Wade Judge Dave Larson, candidate for the state Supreme Court, declined to weigh in on the specific case, but noted that judges, quote, have to use judicial restraint to stay away from decisions that are purely political and make the parties use the political process to make those decisions, end quote. Judge Lasnik tried to step out of the way in the case. In August, he ordered new maps be drawn and adopted by February 7th, with a report on January 8th notifying the court on whether a reconvened commission was able to redraw and transmit to the legislature a revised map by that date. But the Bipartisan Redistricting Commission was not reconvened, which meant the judge was presented with partisan maps to choose from. His March 15 order adopted a map that redraws not only Senator Torres' district, but also those of Senator Curtis King, Republican of Yakima, and Senator Brad Hawkins, Republican of East Wenatchee, as well as their Republican representatives. According to the Senate Republican Campaign Committee, the new map moves more than 500,000 people in 13 districts. And, quote, in comparison, the interveners offered a map with around 80,000 people moved in only 3 districts, end quote. When Hobbs declined to take a position on the state's bipartisan process, he exposed the judiciary to charges of partisanship. And when the Democratic leadership in the legislature refused to reconvene the Bipartisan Redistricting Commission, it put the judge in an impossible position. Whichever map he picked would be attacked by the losing party. Brianna Aho responded on behalf of the Attorney General's office, stating they had, quote, hired a preeminent expert on the Voting Rights Act to respond to the arguments presented by the plaintiffs and interveners, end quote, which resulted in filing a brief supporting the plaintiff. Probably won't find the results in this case highlighted by Hobbs or by Ferguson's gubernatorial campaign. Conservative Hispanic voters may not take kindly to being stereotyped as Democrats. That was the column. And it's a reality that the majority-minority district that was established under the bipartisan redistricting process with a unanimous decision by the 2 Democrat appointees and the 2 Republican appointees has been replaced by the judge. And all redistricting maps are theoretical about their effect until proven otherwise. Well, the 15th legislative district has proved the district certainly could elect a Mexican-American senator, and by a landslide victory. That the Mexican-American Defense Fund would then continue to pursue this case is a travesty of justice and a twisting of the Voter Rights Act for political purposes. It's a perfect example of how the Democratic Party takes minority voters for granted, with the arrogantly patronizing attitude that has come to characterize many of its policy prescriptions. The elites know best, never mind the people. The case is now before the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court. Former Spokane County prosecuting attorney Don Brockett has written a book titled The Tyrannical Rule of the United States Supreme Court, How the Court Has Violated the Constitution. And he writes a regular newsletter on the court, and links to both of those are available on the Forthright Substack post. He told me in a conversation prior to my writing the column that he thought the Supreme Court of the United States might put in a stay, and he said this, and I quote, "This is an area that has become so complex as a result of legislation and court decisions that it's difficult for most anybody to understand. But if we want to have a representative government, we shouldn't be allowing an unelected judge to be making these decisions." End quote. And that's why we, the people of Washington, voted to add an amendment to the state constitution setting up a bipartisan redistricting commission to force discussion and compromise. And presumably to recognize the reality that when a hypothetically majority-minority district in reality elects a member of that majority in that district, that minority majority, to the Washington State Senate, that proves the redistricting process was working. So be sure to subscribe at Substack with or without a pledge for notifications of new content via email from the platform. Take advantage of the opportunity to comment on this and on any previous posts, or to email suggestions for new topics. As always, reference links for this column will be included after the video link in the Substack post. And thanks for listening.